Roy Mitchell's hands shook as he tried to grip his wrench. At 67 years old, his fingers didn't work the way they used to. The arthritis was getting worse, but he couldn't afford the fancy medical treatments the younger workers got. He wiped the grease on his worn coveralls and slowly pushed himself to his feet. Every joint in his body screamed in protest. 30 years. 3 decades he'd been working the salvage docks of Rust Haven Station, floating somewhere in the outer rim where nobody important ever visited. 30 years of being treated like he was invisible, or worse, like he was something stuck to the bottom of someone's boot. Hey, look everyone. The fossil actually moves. Vrel's voice cut through the noise of the docking bay. The Krev supervisor had a cruel streak that seemed to get worse every year. His 4 arms gestured mockingly as Roy shuffled past, trying to get to his workstation. The other mechanics stopped what they were doing to watch. They were all aliens, sleek and efficient with their multiple arms and those fancy implants built right into their heads. They could run diagnostics just by touching a ship's hull. They thought it was hilarious that Roy still used actual tools, actual hands, actual eyes to do his work. Still using those primitive human tools, Mitchell? What's next, going to start rubbing sticks together to make fire? Vrel clicked his mandibles in what passed for alien laughter. The others joined in. Roy kept his head down and said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that talking back just made things worse. Besides, what could he say? They were right. He was old, slow, and outdated. The only reason they hadn't fired him yet was because union rules said they couldn't. The morning shift dragged on like it always did. Roy worked on minor repairs that the other mechanics considered beneath them. Replacing worn seals. Cleaning out coolant lines. Simple stuff that didn't require fancy implants or 4 arms. Then the alarm sounded. A deep space tug was bringing something in. Something big. The entire station crew gathered at the main viewing port to watch. Roy squeezed in at the back where he could barely see over the taller aliens. Through the reinforced glass, he watched as the tug struggled to maneuver an absolutely massive ship into the docking cradle. The vessel was ancient. Roy could tell that much even from a distance. It was covered in layers of cosmic dust so thick that it looked more like a gray asteroid than a spacecraft. The shape was strange too, not like any design he'd seen in his decades of work. Graceful curves met hard angles in ways that didn't match current engineering standards. What really caught his attention were the symbols. The entire hull was covered in them. Strange markings that seemed to shift and flow even though they had to be carved or painted onto the metal. The station's AI tried to analyze them through the external cameras. Roy watched as the translation system sputtered, failed, rebooted, and failed again. Worthless scrap, Vrel announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. Probably been drifting dead for 10,000 years. Maybe more. He turned and his eyes locked onto Roy with unmistakable malice. Turner. This is perfect work for someone with your limited skills. Roy's stomach sank. He knew what was coming. You're going to catalog this garbage. Every panel, every component, every rivet. Then you prep it for the smelters. I'm giving you 2 weeks. If you're not done by then, we'll have a conversation about your continued employment here. Vrel's mandibles clicked again. Assuming there's anything in that wreck worth melting down. The other mechanics snickered. Roy just nodded. Yes, sir. That evening, after the day shift cleared out, Roy made his way to the docking bay where they'd secured the ancient ship. The airlock hissed open and he stepped inside, his tool bag hanging heavy from his shoulder. Up close, the ship was even more impressive. Roy ran his hand along the hull, and even through the thick layer of dust, he could feel the quality of the metal. This wasn't mass-produced station plating. This was crafted, designed with purpose and care. While Vrel and the others saw junk, Roy saw something completely different. He saw the elegant way the hull panels connected, each one fitted perfectly to its neighbor. He saw the deliberate choices in the frame geometry, choices that spoke of someone who understood not just function but beauty. This ship wasn't just built by engineers. It was built by artists who loved their work. Roy pulled out his cleaning supplies and got to work. He started with a small section near what he guessed was the main airlock. As he scrubbed away thousands of years of accumulated dust, he talked quietly to the silent metal. They don't appreciate you, do they? He murmured, his voice echoing in the empty bay. Think you're worthless just because you're old. I know exactly how that feels, friend. I know exactly how that feels. The next morning, 2 of the younger alien mechanics came in early and found him still working, still talking softly to the dead ship. Their laughter rang through the docking bay like sharp bells. By lunchtime, the entire station had heard about it. The crazy old human who talked to garbage. Roy Mitchell, the fossil who'd finally lost his mind. But Roy didn't stop. He came back that night and the night after and the night after that. Something about this ship called to him. Something that went deeper than logic or reason. Something that felt almost like coming home. Roy started coming to the ship only during the night cycles, when most of the station was asleep and the docking bays were empty. He'd wait until his shift ended, grab a quick meal in his quarters, then sneak back down with his cleaning supplies hidden in his tool bag. If anyone asked, he'd say he forgot something at his workstation. The work became more than just a job. It became something personal. As Roy scrubbed away the layers of ancient grime, he found himself talking to the ship like it was an old friend. Maybe he was going crazy. Maybe 30 years of loneliness was finally catching up with him. But it felt good to talk even if nobody was listening. You know, my wife Linda used to say I cared more about machines than people, he said one night, carefully polishing a section of hull that was starting to reveal intricate metalwork underneath. Maybe she was right. Linda passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. The doctors said they could have saved her if we'd caught it earlier, but we couldn't afford the good scanners. Not on my salary. His hand moved in slow circles, revealing more of the beautiful metal beneath. I had a daughter too. Amy. She was so proud when I got hired here, thought her old man was going to work on real spaceships, do important things. But she stopped calling about 5 years back. I think she's embarrassed of me. Her friends' parents are all executives or ship captains or scientists. And her dad is just an old mechanic who cleans toilets and replaces filters. Roy stepped back to admire his work. I used to build colony ships, you know. Back before my hands got shaky and my eyes went bad. Real ships that carried people to new worlds. I was good at it too. The best welder in my crew. But then I got older and suddenly I was too slow, too expensive, too outdated. They put me out to pasture here. He moved to another section, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. You're beautiful under all this grime. Someone loved you once. I can tell by the way you were built. Whoever made you, they didn't just slap parts together. They crafted you. They cared. That's when Roy noticed something strange. The metal under his hand felt warm. Not hot, but distinctly warm, like something alive. He pulled his hand back quickly, then cautiously touched it again. The warmth was still there. Just the station's heating system, he muttered to himself. But the temperature in the docking bay was always kept cold to preserve the salvage. He kept working, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The symbols on the hull seemed different than they had been yesterday. Not in any way he could point to exactly, but when he looked away and then looked back, they seemed to have shifted slightly. Like they were rearranging themselves when he wasn't watching. I'm getting old, Roy said aloud. Seeing things that aren't there. Next thing you know, I'll be hearing voices. He was cleaning near what looked like it might have been a control panel when it happened. His hand slipped on a sharp edge and pain shot through his palm. Blood welled up from a deep cut. Damn it. Roy grabbed for a rag, but some of the blood had already dripped onto a strange crystalline surface embedded in the panel. The ship hummed. It was a deep sound, felt more than heard, like standing next to a massive generator spinning up. Roy's heart nearly stopped. For just a second, maybe two, lights flickered to life in the darkness of the corridor ahead. Pale blue lights that hadn't shone in who knows how many thousands of years. Then they died and the humming stopped. Roy stood frozen, his bleeding hand forgotten. His heart hammered so hard he thought he might be having an attack. With shaking fingers, he pressed his palm against the crystal again, smearing more blood across its surface. Nothing happened. He tried again. And again. Nothing. I'm losing it, he muttered, wrapping his hand with the rag. Too many years alone. Too many years talking to machines. I'm going senile. But he couldn't stop thinking about those lights. About that hum. About the way the ship had felt almost alive for just a moment. The next morning Roy was exhausted. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities he didn't dare believe. He was so distracted that he didn't notice Vrel standing near the entrance to the docking bay until it was too late. Well. Sneaking off to visit your girlfriend again, Mitchell? The supervisor's voice was loud enough to carry across the entire bay. Other mechanics stopped working to watch. Roy's face flushed. Just finishing the catalog work, sir? Finishing. Vrel's laugh was harsh. The entire crew tells me you spend hours in there, talking to that dead wreck like it's going to answer you back. Do you know how pathetic that is? The other mechanics had gathered now, forming a circle. Roy felt like a specimen under glass. Vrel moved closer, his forearms crossing in a gesture of contempt. You're a pathetic human. You think this corpse cares about your feelings? You waste time because your species is too sentimental to understand when something is dead. His translator crackled with static as his voice rose. You project emotions onto metal and circuits because you're too primitive to accept reality. Someone in the crowd laughed. Others joined in. One more shift, Mitchell. Vrel's eyes were hard. You get one more night to finish your catalog. Then this trash gets melted down. And maybe you with it if you don't start acting like a real mechanic instead of a crazy old fool. The laughter grew louder. Roy's face burned with shame, but he just nodded silently and walked away. One more night. That's all he had left with the ship. He just hoped he wasn't actually going insane. Roy brought a bottle of cheap whiskey to his final shift. It was the kind of stuff that burned going down, the kind he used to drink with his crew after finishing a particularly tough welding job. He figured the ship deserved a proper send-off, even if nobody else cared. The docking bay was empty and silent as he approached. His footsteps echoed off the metal walls. Roy patted the ship's hull as he entered, the way you'd pat an old dog before taking it to the vet for the last time. Well, friend, this is it, he said quietly, setting down his supplies. Tomorrow they fire up the smelters and turn you into scrap metal. Probably make you into toilet fixtures or floor panels. I'm sorry. I really am. He started working his way through the ship, cleaning sections he'd missed, polishing panels until they gleamed. The whiskey bottle sat nearby, and he took occasional sips as he worked. Not enough to get drunk, just enough to steady his nerves and quiet the voice in his head that kept telling him he was a failure. I tried to figure you out, Roy said, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn patch of grime near what he thought might be the command deck. I really did. But I'm just not smart enough. Not important enough. I'm just an old man who talks to machines because he's got nobody else to talk to. He found what looked like it might have been the captain's chair, though it was hard to tell under all the accumulated dust. Roy spent extra time on it, cleaning every surface until the metal underneath shone. It was beautiful work, ergonomic and elegant at the same time. Whoever sat here had been someone important. I bet you had a good captain, Roy murmured. Someone brave. Someone who mattered. As he finished, his hand came to rest on a panel beside the chair. It looked decorative, covered in those same strange symbols that had been puzzling him. He gave it one last polish. The ship exploded to life. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't subtle. 1 second Roy was standing in darkness and the next the entire vessel blazed with light. Corridors that had been dead for thousands of years suddenly glowed with soft blue illumination. Panels that had been dark lit up with displays showing information in languages and formats Roy had never seen before. Energy surged through systems that modern engineers would have sworn were impossible. Roy could feel it in the air, feel it humming through the deck plates under his feet. The ship was breathing again, living again after an eternity of silence. Every screen on Rust Haven Station flickered and died. Emergency lights kicked on throughout the facility. Then every display, every monitor, every communication panel showed the same message in perfect, clear English. Roy Mitchell. Authorization code, Genesis Seed 7. Welcome home, architect. The station's alarms began to scream. Roy stumbled backward, his hand clutching at his chest. His heart felt like it was going to explode. What did I do? Oh God, what did I do? Through the ship's hull, he could hear chaos erupting on the station. People shouting. Feet running. More alarms joining the first ones. Then the ship's shields activated. Roy didn't know how he knew what they were, but he just knew. They were stronger than anything the station had, stronger than anything in the entire modern galaxy. Defensive systems that could probably shrug off a direct hit from a battleship's main cannon. Weapon systems came online next. Roy felt them more than saw them, felt ancient guns and energy projectors that made the station's defensive turrets look like children's toys. If this ship wanted to, it could reduce Rust Haven to atoms. The Krev technicians throughout the station scattered in pure panic. Their sensors were going haywire. Their systems couldn't even classify what they were looking at. Vrel burst onto the command deck with 6 armed security guards, their weapons raised and pointed directly at Roy. The supervisor's face was twisted with fear and rage. Mitchell, what have you activated? Shut it down. Shut it down right now. Vrel was practically screaming, his translator crackling with static. Roy raised his hands, his own fear making him shake. I don't know. I didn't mean to. I just touched a panel and... Before he could finish, the air in front of him shimmered like heat rising from hot pavement. Roy's words died in his throat. A figure materialized out of nothing. It was a hologram, but unlike any hologram Roy had ever seen. It looked human but perfected somehow. Ageless. Beautiful in a way that was almost painful to look at. It wore clothing that seemed to shift between ancient robes and something like a military uniform. You will not harm the architect, the figure said. Its voice was calm, gentle even, but it carried absolute authority. "Lower your weapons. Now." One of the security guards fired. The energy bolt passed straight through the hologram and hit the wall behind it. The figure didn't even blink. "I am Prometheus," it continued as if nothing had happened. "I am the intelligence of this vessel. This ship belongs to Roy Mitchell by birthright and blood. You exist because his ancestors sacrificed everything they had and everything they were. Show respect." Vrel's weapon clattered to the floor. His forearms hung limp at his sides. The other guards slowly lowered their guns, their faces showing pure shock. Roy stared at the hologram, then down at his own weathered, shaking hands. Hands that were covered in scars from decades of manual labor. Hands that could barely hold a wrench steady anymore. "There's been a mistake," he whispered. "I'm nobody. I'm just a mechanic. I never worked on anything called Genesis Seed 7. I never did anything important in my entire life." Prometheus turned to face him fully. The hologram's eyes were kind, almost sad. "Your DNA does not lie, Roy Mitchell. Your blood opened the locks that have held for 50,000 years. Your genetic code carries markers that cannot be faked or duplicated." The figure smiled gently. "Welcome home, son of Earth. Welcome home, architect." The conference room on Rust Haven had never been this crowded. Roy sat in a chair at the center of the long table, still wearing his greasy coveralls because nobody had given him time to change. He felt completely out of place. Around him sat alien officials in expensive uniforms, human representatives from Earth's diplomatic corps, station administrators, and military officers from 3 different species. Everyone was talking at once, voices rising in confusion and fear. Roy just wanted to disappear. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Prometheus's hologram stood beside him, patient and calm while chaos swirled around them. Finally, the AI raised one hand, and somehow that simple gesture cut through all the noise. The room fell silent. "I will explain," Prometheus said. "Please hold your questions until I have finished." The hologram's form seemed to solidify slightly, becoming more present. "This vessel is over 50,000 years old. It was built by an ancient human civilization that spanned multiple galaxies, a civilization that existed long before any of your modern cultures had even discovered fire." The room erupted. Aliens were shouting in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep up. The human representatives looked just as shocked as everyone else. "That's impossible," someone yelled. "Humans are newcomers to the galaxy. We've only been in space for 200 years, a human diplomat added, her face pale. "Before that we were stuck on Earth. We barely had computers." "Impossible," Vrel hissed from his corner of the room. His forearms were crossed tightly, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "Humans are primitives. Everyone knows this. They can barely operate their own ships without help." Prometheus waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "I understand your disbelief. The truth has been lost to time, buried under millennia of darkness. But I was there. I remember." The hologram's expression grew distant, sad. Ancient humanity did not stay on Earth. They reached for the stars early in their development and built an empire that stretched across galaxies. They were not conquerors or tyrants. They were explorers, scientists, artists. They built worlds and protected younger species as they evolved. Roy listened, his mouth dry. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of mistake. "Then they discovered something in the deepest parts of space," Prometheus continued. "An enemy. Not a species or a nation, but something far worse. An extinction-level threat that consumed entire galaxies, leaving nothing but dead worlds and silence in its wake. This enemy did not negotiate. It did not communicate. It simply destroyed all life it encountered." The room was completely silent now. Even the skeptics had stopped objecting. "Ancient humanity had a choice," the AI said quietly. "They could flee, try to hide in the empty spaces between galaxies and hope the enemy never found them. Or they could fight." "And?" Roy croaked, his voice barely working. "You had to know." Prometheus turned to look at him with those ageless eyes. "They chose to fight. They built weapons that could crack planets. They developed shields that could withstand stars exploding. And they built 7-seat ships, vessels like this one designed to survive anything. These ships carried the genetic templates to restart human civilization, along with the knowledge and technology of everything they had achieved." The hologram paused, and Roy could swear he saw grief in that artificial face. "They fought for 300 years. And they won. The enemy was destroyed completely, wiped from existence. But the cost was total." "What do you mean?" asked one of the human diplomats. Ancient humanity fell, Prometheus said simply. Their empire was shattered. Their worlds were burned. Their people were scattered across space, reduced to primitive tribes struggling to survive. Most of those tribes died out. But one group landed on a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. They forgot everything they had been. Forgot the stars, forgot the wars, forgot their own greatness. They started over from nothing. Roy felt tears on his face. Earth, he whispered. Yes, Earth. Prometheus nodded. You are their descendants, Roy Mitchell. Modern humanity evolved back to the stars naturally, without any memory of what your ancestors had accomplished. You did it on your own with nothing but your determination and creativity. In some ways, that makes you even more remarkable than your ancestors. But why do I matter? Roy asked, his voice breaking. Why me specifically? I'm nobody. Prometheus knelt down beside Roy's chair, bringing the hologram's face level with his. Your DNA carries genetic markers from the chief engineer of this vessel. My creator. Those markers have been passed down through 50,000 years of human reproduction, waiting. But more than that. The AI stood and addressed the entire room. I have scanned millions of humans across the galaxy since I awakened. Roy Mitchell is the first whose behavior matched the patterns of my creators. He spoke to me when I was silent and broken. He saw beauty in what others called worthless. He refused to give up even when everyone mocked him for caring. These were the defining traits of the ancient human engineers who built me. Prometheus turned to face the alien officials. The Krev civilization. The Ithran collective. The Mordath Empire. Every spacefaring species in this galaxy owes its existence to humanity's sacrifice. The 7 seed ships did not just preserve human DNA. They shepherded your evolution. They protected your worlds from threats you never knew existed. They eliminated dangers before you were advanced enough to even detect them. The hologram's voice grew harder. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because humanity sacrificed itself to protect this galaxy. And this is how you repay them? With mockery? With contempt. Silence filled the conference room like a physical weight. Roy watched as understanding slowly dawned on the faces around him. The alien officials looked sick. The human representatives sat in stunned disbelief. Vrel looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. All 4 of his arms hung limp. His mandibles had stopped moving completely. Roy just sat there, an old mechanic in dirty coveralls, while the entire galaxy's understanding of history crumbled around him. Roy stood alone in the command chamber later that night, after all the officials and diplomats had finally left. The lights of the ancient ship glowed softly around him, and Prometheus's hologram stood nearby, waiting patiently. The AI had spent the last hour explaining everything. The technology stored in the ship's databanks could change everything humans understood about physics, medicine, engineering. There were weapons that could destroy planets. Shields that could protect entire star systems. Medical technology that could cure any disease, reverse any injury, extend life for centuries. And it was all his. All he had to do was accept it. I can restore your body, Prometheus said quietly. Your arthritis, your failing eyesight, your weakening heart. I can make you 25 years old again, stronger and healthier than you've ever been. I can upload the knowledge of your ancestors directly into your mind. Everything they knew, everything they built, everything they accomplished. You would become the architect in truth. Roy looked down at his weathered hands. The hands that shook when he tried to hold tools steady. The hands that were covered in scars from decades of hard work that nobody appreciated. You could find the other 6 seed ships, Prometheus continued. Wake them as you woke me. Restore humanity to its former glory. With this technology, Earth could become the greatest power in the galaxy. The other species would kneel. They would beg for your mercy and your guidance. After 30 years of being treated like trash, you could make them respect you. Fear you. You would never be called a fossil again. How many nights had Roy dreamed of exactly that? Of being important again? Of being respected? Of walking into a room and having people actually listen when he spoke? He was quiet for a long time, just staring at his hands. Finally he spoke. What would my ancestors want? They wanted humanity to survive, Prometheus answered. No. Roy shook his head slowly. That's not all they wanted. They wanted life to survive. All life. That's why they fought, isn't it? Not for human supremacy. Not to rule over everyone else. They fought for everyone. He looked up at the hologram. You said they protected younger species. They helped them evolve. They didn't conquer or control. They guided. That is correct, Prometheus confirmed. Roy thought about the young human workers he'd seen on the station. Kids fresh from Earth or the colonies, excited to be working in space, building their own futures. They'd grown up free without anyone telling them they were better than other species. They'd built their own path to the stars through hard work and determination. He thought about Linda, his wife, who'd loved him even when he was just a struggling mechanic with grease under his fingernails. She'd never cared that he wasn't important or powerful. She'd loved him for who he was. He thought about Amy, his daughter, who'd stopped calling because Roy had become so bitter. He'd spent years complaining about being unimportant, about being disrespected, about deserving better. No wonder she'd pulled away. "I don't want to be an emperor," Roy said finally. "I don't want to conquer anyone or make anyone kneel. I want to be what I've always been. A mechanic. A teacher." Prometheus tilted its head, genuinely curious. "You would give up this power? You would remain old and weak when I can make you young and strong." "I wouldn't give it up," Roy corrected gently. "I'd share it. With everyone. Humans, Krev, all the species in the galaxy. Let the knowledge out slowly and carefully. Let them earn it, grow into it, learn to use it responsibly. That's what my ancestors did, right? They earned their place in the stars through hard work and sacrifice. These species should have the same chance." The next morning, Vrel and the Krev Council arrived at the ship with armed escorts. They expected threats, demands, maybe even war. Instead, they found Roy Mitchell sitting in the captain's chair, still wearing his greasy coveralls, holding a simple wrench in his lap. "This ship's knowledge will be shared freely," Roy announced calmly. "With all species, not just humans. We're going to build a university right here on Rust Haven. We'll teach the old ways, the ancient knowledge to anyone who wants to learn. No empires. No masters. No one species ruling over the others. Just people learning to build better things." Vrel stared at him, mandibles hanging open in shock. "You're giving it away?" "Sharing," Roy corrected. "There's a difference." The gesture was so unexpected, so fundamentally human, that it left even the hostile aliens speechless. No one had ever turned down ultimate power before. No species had ever chosen to share instead of conquer. 3 months later, the Rust Haven Technical Academy held its first classes. Roy taught alongside Prometheus, showing young humans and aliens alike the proper way to work with machines and technology. The classes were packed, students from a dozen species sitting side by side. "Now, the most important thing to remember," Roy said to a classroom full of wide-eyed students, "is that you've got to talk to the machines. Treat them with respect. Care for them properly. I know it sounds silly, but metal remembers kindness. A ship that's been cared for will take care of you when it matters most." A young Krev student raised one of her arms. "But machines don't have feelings. How can they remember?" Roy smiled. "Maybe they don't have feelings the way we do. But they respond to how they're treated. A machine built with care works better than one slapped together. A machine maintained with respect lasts longer than one that's neglected. That's not magic. That's just truth." After class, Roy returned to his small office. His terminal was blinking with a new message. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the name, Amy. "Dad, I saw the news about what happened. About the ship and everything. I'm sorry I didn't call for so long. I was wrong to pull away. Can we talk? Please? I miss you." Roy sat down heavily, tears blurring his vision. His shaking hands typed out a response. "Yes, sweetheart. We can talk. I've missed you too. I've got so much to tell you." Behind him, through the office window, Prometheus's hologram stood on the ship's command deck. The AI was watching Roy with something that might have been pride or satisfaction or maybe even love. The architect had returned after all. Not to conquer but to guide. Not to take revenge but to teach. Just as the ancient humans had always intended.